Well, welcome to the Cinnabar. Now today we've got an episode that I think you Colt fans will find absolutely fascinating, and especially you fans of the single action army. See, today we're going to be looking at a very early and very rare example of a single action army. This is one of the very first 4440 chambered single action armies produced, what John Kopech refers to as a pre-frontier model. But what's really fascinating about this one is the barrel. You see, this is one of the very first barrels from the experimental phase of the single action armies produced clear back in 1872, and it's got a 7-groove gain twist rifled barrel. In other words, the rifling starts off pretty slowly and then the twist rate increases as it goes down the barrel. Now, most of us who follow Colts know that the early percussion revolvers like this 51 Navy had 7-groove gain twist rifling. But when we went to the single action armies, I was under the impression that that all went away, and they started off making them in 45 Colt with a 6-groove with a constant rifling, and that's not the case at all. Now, this one I found actually at the Colt Collectors Association show this year. My wife, of course, if you watch the channel, is a Colt collector, has a fabulous eye for very nice condition collectible Colts. So this one didn't really catch her eye. There's no finish on this one at all. But when I heard about the barrel and started researching it a little bit, it just caught my fancy. I like the rare and interesting type of firearms. So this one came home with me from the show, and I just am fascinated with this old thing and the history behind it. Now, if you're curious about how gain twist rifling was made, we're in a unique position to show you here. You see, this is a first-generation Pratt & Whitney rifling machine that was in operation in the Stevens plant in the same time frame that Colt was developing those early single-action army revolvers. And it works fairly simply. We've got a sign bar here, which this roller rides up and down on. It runs this rack and pinion up here, which in turn turns this rod here that has a rifling cutter. Here's the barrels out here and set up in this mechanism. So this running up and down turns that, and it turns it at a constant rate. Now, if we were going to make a gain twist barrel, then we'd just change out the sign bars. Instead of a straight line, we'd have one here that has a curve in it. So as that roller rides down here, it's barely putting any kind of a twist on it, and then it rides up here and we get that gain twist out towards the end of the barrel. It's pretty fascinating stuff. We did an episode on this, and if you're curious about this machine and want to see it running, look up that episode on this early Pratt & Whitney rifling machine. Now, in the fall of 1872, Colt brought several of these prototype single-action armies to military trials, where they competed against the Smith & Wessons chambered in 44 Smith & Wesson American. But Colt brought theirs chambered in 44 Russian, thinking that that was a superior cartridge to the 44 Smith & Wesson American. But the Ordnance Department really wanted to compare the two revolvers with the same chambering. So Colt went back and chambered some cylinders in 44 American as well. So these earliest prototype single-action armies were chambered in both 44 Russian, 44 American. But of course the barrels were the same 7-groove gain twist rifled barrels. Now, at some point, the Army went back and said, we really would prefer a 45 caliber cartridge for these single-action armies. So, of course, Colt went back to work, and the rest is history with the development of 45 Colt. And at that time, the 45 Colt barrels were as well a 7-groove gain twist rifling. And it wasn't until just a couple of days before Colt signed the military contract with the Army that they came back and said, look, if you'll give us a little bit more time, we've developed a better rifling for this particular revolver. And so they came back with the 6-groove 1 in 16 constant twist rifling that we're familiar with today. But according to John Kopech's research, the Colt had produced about 100 to 150 of these early 44 gain twist barrels Some of them have been put on the guns, of course, for the trials, and there are a couple that survive today of the very earliest serial numbers. Number 4 and number 14, early serial number Colts, still have that 44 gain twist barrel. Now, we don't know if they were all put on frames at the time. We suspect that a lot of them were removed and replaced with 45 caliber barrels, because we've got several. In fact, serial number 1 has a 45 caliber barrel and probably started out life with a 44. But anyway, there was between 100 and 150 of these that were left over, and we believe there was an order of about 50 of them that went to Germany, so that left about 50 to 100 of these barrels that were left over. Now, in 1877, Colt had the great idea of chambering single-action armies in 4440, so that we'd have a companion for the very popular Winchester rifle in 4440, the 1873s. A great idea. And of course, the gun manufacturers were very frugal. They didn't waste much. So somewhere in the Colt factory, there was a bunch of these 44 caliber gain twist barrels around. So the very first 4440 single action armies used those gain twist barrels up that had been sitting around since late 1872. Now, I've been doing a lot of research and of course finding a lot from John Kopek, who's really the guru of single action armies, and his book, The Study of the Single Action Army Revolver, that he wrote with Graham and Moore, has quite a little bit about these. He did an article for the Arms Gazette clear back in 1976, almost 50 years ago, on these gain twist rifled single action armies. And interestingly, he had found 3 of them at that time that had been made in that early 4440 production run. And this one that I had picked up is one of them that he used in that article. And so there's several things that identify this as being one of those barrels from 1872. So let's take a little closer look at some of the things that are different about this than we would expect on even the other early 4440 single action armies. Of course, the most obvious feature indicating this is a early gain twist barrel is the rifling itself. It's probably kind of hard to see, and I'm probably blinding you with the bore light there, but if you can make that out, the rifling gets much more tight as we get down here towards this end. Now, it's believed that Colt didn't make any gain twist rifled single action armies past early 1873. So this one produced in 1877, of course, would indicate that it's a much earlier barrel. Now the next thing we can see, and it's very difficult to see on this one, I have to admit, but the barrel address is, according to Kopek, they went and compared it to the other stamped barrels from the era, and it's the exact same roll die that stamped these barrels and this barrel address that was used on the Richards-Mason conversion revolvers from 1872. So another indication that this barrel was produced in 1872. Now, it doesn't have what we come to expect on 1873s in 4440, any kind of stamping or etched panel here saying Frontier 6-shooter. Another indication that it's an earlier 1873. Now there is, and it's really hard to see, and I don't think we can probably pick it up here on the camera, but there is a caliber mark right down here on the bottom of the barrel, says 44. And the only other caliber mark is right here. It says 44 CF, and again, it's probably going to be very difficult to pick up. There's not much finish, and it's pretty slight here on the side of the trigger guard. Now, one of the things that's kind of striking about this particular revolver, especially considering that it has very little finish and it's over 150 years old, is that mechanically it's in excellent condition. Times up beautifully. Had a little bit of end shake in it. We took that out. It's got a little excess barrel cylinder gap, but not bad, and especially for a black powder revolver. If you noticed when we looked down in the bore, it's got very strong rifling. Even though it's frosted like most black powder bores are, this thing is just in great shape, and certainly a very shootable revolver. But there's one thing that caused me some concern when I was reading Kopech's description of these barrels, and that's the dimension of the bore. Now, he mentions that the land diameter, the smaller diameter, is 42 caliber, which that's not a problem. But these have really deep rifling, and he mentions a bore diameter of 442. And of course, we know that 4440, the diameter should be about 427, 428. So 442 would be very oversized. And, you know, in my experiences with first model 1873s, they have oversized bores too. So you got to wonder about the early 73s and Colt single action armies in 4440. People must have thought they were terribly inaccurate, but it's more a function of bore diameter, I think, than the cartridge itself. So what I did is went back and slugged this bore, and we got a really nice slug because of these deep grooves. It made a very well-defined slug, and so you know, it's really hard to measure when you have an odd number of grooves, because your lands on one side and grooves on the other. But you know, the highest point here, we're at like 337. That's quite a bit oversized. So we've got the cylinder out now. Before we put it back in, let's measure it. And we're right where we should be with a 4440, 427. 427, yeah, I mean, it's consistent. Another 426 and a half. So, you know, I'm pretty sure that these weren't going to be really super accurate revolvers. In fact, we would probably stand back and throw bullets at a target and be just about as accurate. But of course, that's why we're here, and that's what we're going to find out. So let's go up on the hill and see. Okay, now in order to try to get this thing to shoot halfway accurately, we've loaded up some black powder soft cast bullets. We've got some with just a flat straight base, and then we've got some with a hollow base, and we're hoping we can pump it up and try to get at least some engagement into these lands and grooves. We're not going to shoot from any long distance for sure, but we're gonna see what we can do putting them on paper. We'll try these flat base bullets first and just see how they do, and then we'll go ahead and try those hollow base bullets. Kind of think that if we have a chance of bumping them up and filling those lands and grooves, it'll be with those hollow base bullets. Okay, so let's get started here, and of course we're going to start off and see if we can't hit a jug first, just to see if we're anywhere close. Yeah, we hit a little bit high there. Okay, now on paper. Oh, it's all over the target. Okay, let's see what we got out there. Okay, so actually we're shooting pretty high. Elevation is pretty consistent but high right across here. Here's all 5 shots. Windage wise, we're got kind of a wide spread, but that's maybe a little better than I expected, and round holes. So having that oversized bore, we're not keyholing, and of course we're not very far out, but that's actually a little better than I was expecting. Let's go try those hollow base bullets. Okay, let's give these hollow base bullets a try now. It sure is kind of nice shooting this old girl out here in the wide open spaces of the West where she belongs. A little windy today, but we're close enough. It shouldn't be throwing it too far off course. Okay, let's load her up. And of course, since we're not carrying it today, we're just shooting on target. We're loading all 6 cylinders. Okay, here we go. We're going to aim a little lower this time. Oh, there we go. Oh, let's see how we did this time. Okay, looks like we actually did group up a little bit better this time. We've got 4 right here, and then we've got an extra hole up here. So we had 4 of them kind of together here a little bit, 1 up here. So, and nice little round holes again. So it stabilized better than I was expecting. Well, it's just wonderful to shoot an old piece of Colt's history like this one. And we know there are at least 5 of these in existence, and there may be a few more out there that we don't know about. Now, if you cringe a little bit when you see something like this being shot on this channel, you may be watching the wrong channel. Our philosophy is, if they're in good shootable shape, they deserve to be shot. That's what they were made for. Now, I'd like to thank my good buddy Benji Abbott. He supplied those bullets we were using today, and he does a heck of a job casting them up. I gotta tell you, this thing shoots better than I expected. With this oversized bore, I really wasn't expecting good little round holes and for it to shoot as well as it did. So, a pleasant surprise. Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I sure as heck have. Until next time, happy trails from the Cinnabar.